For centuries, the story of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba has been told in short, familiar strokes. She visits him, tests his wisdom, and leaves impressed. That's all you get in the Bible. But what if there was more to it? Hidden in the pages of an ancient Ethiopian text called the Kebra Nagast is a narrative that adds unexpected depth and divine weight to this legendary encounter. This book, banned and largely unknown to the Western Church for centuries, doesn't just tell a longer version of the meeting between Solomon and Sheba, it reimagines it as a pivotal moment in spiritual history. In this text, the Queen of Sheba isn't just a curious foreign monarch. She's part of a sacred plan. Her journey to Jerusalem wasn't merely political or intellectual. According to the Kebra Nagast, it was orchestrated by God himself. The text paints a vivid picture of their connection. In Ethiopian tradition, the queen is given a name, Makeda, and her relationship with Solomon becomes intimate, even romantic. The story describes how Solomon welcomed her not only into his palace, but into his heart. They're said to have spent a night together, and from that union came a child, Menelik I. This detail central to Ethiopian history and spiritual identity is completely absent from the Bible. There's no mention of a son, no hint of a lineage. But in the Kebra Nagast, Menelik isn't just any child. He's a royal heir with a divine purpose. His birth is framed as part of a larger, God-ordained mission to extend Solomon's wisdom and spiritual legacy beyond the borders of Israel and into Africa. It's not just a love story. It's a foundational myth that has given shape to centuries of Ethiopian royal tradition and religious belief. What makes this version of the story so striking isn't just its content, it's the confidence and clarity with which it rewrites sacred history. The Kebra Nagast doesn't shy away from claiming Ethiopia's place in the biblical narrative. Instead, it boldly declares that the connection between Solomon and Makeda was no accident. It was prophecy. Their son, Menelik, would go on to shape Ethiopia's destiny, not merely as a ruler, but as the beginning of a spiritual inheritance. For Ethiopians, this story isn't folklore. It's sacred history. It's a story that explains why Ethiopia matters in the grand scheme of divine purpose. And it all begins not with war or conquest, but with an encounter, quiet, spiritual, and, in this version of the tale, chosen by God. Menelik, I didn't grow up knowing his father. Raised in Ethiopia by Queen Makeda, he was the product of a divine union that most of the world had no idea ever happened. But as he matured, he began to feel an undeniable spiritual pull, an inner calling that pushed him to seek out his roots. According to the Kebra Nagast, this was no ordinary curiosity. It was divine guidance. When he finally made the journey to Jerusalem as a young man, the meeting between father and son wasn't awkward or uncertain. King Solomon recognized Menelik immediately, not only as his child, but as his rightful heir. This powerful moment, totally absent from the Bible, became a cornerstone in Ethiopia's claim to a sacred lineage. In this telling, Menelik wasn't just a visiting foreign prince. He was the living proof of a royal bloodline ordained by God himself. But Menelik's visit to Jerusalem wasn't just about family. It became a turning point in spiritual history. Solomon offered him the throne of Israel, inviting him to stay and rule after him. That would have changed everything. But guided once again by divine insight, Menelik declined. He chose to return to Ethiopia, feeling his destiny wasn't in continuing his father's rule, but in forging his own path. And here's where the story takes a dramatic turn. Before he left, a group of priests and loyal followers, inspired by a higher purpose, decided to take with them the most sacred object in all of Judaism, the Ark of the Covenant. They didn't steal it out of greed or rebellion. According to the Kebra Nagast, they were following God's will, ensuring that the Ark would be protected from the conflicts and corruption that would later consume Jerusalem. They brought it to Ethiopia quietly, faithfully, and with deep reverence. The implications of that journey are staggering. The Ark of the Covenant, believed to hold the Ten Commandments and symbolize God's very presence among his people, was now in a new land, entrusted not to Israel, but to Ethiopia. This wasn't an accident. It was portrayed as divine strategy. Menelik and his companions became more than travelers. They were guardians of a sacred legacy. Their journey back to Ethiopia wasn't easy, but the Kebra Nagas describes it as being divinely protected. Miracles accompanied their passage. Joy and purpose filled the hearts of those carrying the Ark, because they believed they were part of a new covenant, one in which Ethiopia was chosen to carry forward God's truth. This moment didn't just shape Ethiopia's spiritual identity, it redefined it. With the Ark now within its borders, Ethiopia wasn't just a distant kingdom. It became a central player in the unfolding story of faith and divine will. For those who only know the Bible's version of events, the idea that Ethiopia could be a chosen nation, one that carries the mantle of Israel's spiritual mission, might seem unbelievable. But in the Kebra Nagast, this idea isn't just hinted at, it's central. The text makes it clear. When the Ark of the Covenant was brought to Ethiopia by Menelik and his followers, it wasn't some side story or forgotten detour in history. It was the beginning of a new divine chapter. Ethiopia, far from being a footnote in biblical history, was being entrusted with the very presence of God. This wasn't about replacing Israel, but about continuing the mission of carrying God's law, wisdom, and protection into a new land. Ethiopia, in this view, didn't just become a safe haven for the Ark, it became the new guardian of God's covenant on earth. What's profound about this claim is how confidently it shifts the center of spiritual gravity. In the Bible, the Ark is the heart of Israel's faith. It sits in the Holy of Holies in Solomon's temple, surrounded by strict rituals and held as the most sacred object in existence. But the Kebra Nagast says that God himself ordained that the Ark be relocated. Not lost, not hidden, but transferred. Ethiopia, then, isn't just the Ark's hiding place, it becomes a spiritual capital. The country is portrayed as being protected by divine favor, blessed not only by its connection to Solomon's bloodline, but also by its role in safeguarding the most sacred symbol of God's presence. And this isn't just history. For centuries, Ethiopians have believed that this role defines who they are, not just as a people, but as part of God's larger plan. This shift from Jerusalem to Ethiopia carries more than theological weight. It reshapes identity. The Kebra Nagast boldly claims that Ethiopia is not merely a recipient of the Ark, but its rightful guardian. That's a powerful responsibility. It means that for Ethiopians, their land isn't just holy because of what they believe, it's holy because of what it holds. The Ark's presence in Ethiopia according to the text, offers divine protection, wisdom, and legitimacy. It makes Ethiopia part of a living covenant. And over the centuries, this belief has deeply shaped Ethiopian culture, politics, and faith. From emperors to monks to everyday believers, the sense that Ethiopia was chosen has never faded. It's not just a national myth, it's a sacred truth passed down through generations. In a world where many faith stories have faded into metaphor, Ethiopia's connection to the Ark remains vividly alive, grounded in faith, tradition, and the enduring claim that God's presence never truly left. It simply moved. The birth of Menelik. I didn't just create a son, it created a legacy. According to the Kebra Nagast, when Menelik returned to Ethiopia with the Ark of the Covenant, he also carried with him something else, the bloodline of King Solomon, and by extension King David. That lineage would become the foundation for Ethiopia's Solomonic dynasty, a royal line that lasted for over 1,000 years. For Ethiopians, this wasn't just a political claim. It was sacred. Their emperors weren't just kings. They were believed to be direct descendants of Israel's most legendary ruler. This belief gave their rule a divine legitimacy that no military conquest or political power alone could provide. It connected their land to biblical history in a personal and deeply spiritual way, and it made their crown feel like more than a symbol. It was a responsibility given by God. In the Bible, the Davidic covenant is a huge deal. God promises David that his descendants will sit on the throne forever, and that his kingdom will endure through all generations. The kings of Judah saw themselves as the keepers of this promise, spiritual and political leaders who ruled with divine approval. But while the Bible doesn't mention Solomon having a son with the Queen of Sheba, the Kebra Nagast fills in that silence with a powerful alternative. That the Davidic line didn't end with Israel's fall, it continued in Ethiopia. By tracing the Ethiopian royal line through Menelik back to Solomon and David, the Kebra Nagast essentially rewrites the story of God's covenant. It says that while Jerusalem was overrun and the temple destroyed, God's promise lived on in a new land, with a new people, under a new name. That idea transformed Ethiopian monarchy into something entirely unique. The emperors, including the famous Haile Selassie, didn't just claim to rule, they believed, and were believed by many, to have been chosen by God to protect both their people and the Ark. Their authority wasn't just in their armies or their wealth. It came from their sacred duty to guard the covenant. That's why, for centuries, the monarchy and the church in Ethiopia were so closely intertwined. Religion and politics weren't separate, they were woven together, each legitimizing the other. And the source of that legitimacy was the belief in the Solomonic line. Even after the monarchy ended in 1974, this idea didn't vanish. For many, the fall of the dynasty was seen not as an end, but as a pause in God's plan. The bloodline, they believe, still exists, waiting for its purpose in the unfolding of divine prophecy. Whether viewed through history or through faith, the Solomonic dynasty stands as one of the most powerful examples of a nation's identity being built not just on who rules, but on why they rule. Long after kings and empires have come and gone, the belief that the Ark of the Covenant rests in Ethiopia has remained unshaken. According to the Kebra Nagast, The Ark was brought to Ethiopia by Menelik I and has been guarded ever since, not just by emperors, but by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church itself. For Ethiopians, this isn't just a story passed down through generations. It's a living reality. The Ark is believed to be housed in the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, in the ancient city of Aksum. No one is allowed to see it except a single specially chosen guardian monk who devotes his entire life to protecting it. This secrecy has only added to the mystery and reverence surrounding the Ark. To this day, many Ethiopians believe its presence provides spiritual protection over their entire nation, like a divine shield that has watched over them for centuries. The role of the Ethiopian Church in this story is profound. While the monarchy claimed its authority through bloodline, the Church has claimed its purpose through guardianship. From early Christianity all the way through modern times, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has centered its faith around the Ark. It's not just a relic or a piece of history, it's the very presence of God on earth. Every year, the church holds religious festivals like Timkat, where replicas of the Ark, called tablets, are paraded through the streets, wrapped in cloth, celebrated with songs and rituals. The real Ark, though, remains unseen, untouched by the public eye, locked away in prayerful solitude. And yet, its influence is everywhere in church architecture, in liturgy, and how faith is taught to children. For Ethiopians, the Ark isn't something from the past. It is a part of their spiritual present, woven into their identity as a chosen people. This sacred relationship between the church and the Ark has created a unique form of spiritual authority in Ethiopia. The church doesn't just preach about God, it sees itself as the literal custodian of God's covenant. And that belief has kept Ethiopia deeply rooted in its faith, even as the world around it changes. While Western Christianity often looks to Rome, Jerusalem, or Constantinople, Ethiopians look inward toward Aksum. The Ark has become a symbol not just of divine favor, but of national resilience and purpose. Even after the fall of the Solomonic dynasty, the Church's role as protector of the Ark never faltered. It has stood as a spiritual anchor through invasions, revolutions, and modern political shifts. And for many believers, the Church's ongoing guardianship of the Ark isn't just a responsibility, it's a prophecy in motion, a sacred trust that connects the people of Ethiopia to God in a way that is both deeply personal and undeniably powerful. In 1974, after ruling for centuries, the Solomonic dynasty in Ethiopia came to an end. The last emperor, Haile Selassie, regarded by many not just as a political leader, but as a spiritual figure, was overthrown during a time of great unrest and revolution. For a nation that had always tied its identity to a royal bloodline believed to descend directly from King Solomon and King David, this wasn't just the fall of a monarchy, it was the collapse of a sacred tradition. Suddenly, the divine chain that had been preserved for generations was broken, or so it seemed. The physical throne was gone. The royal court was dissolved. And yet, something deeper refused to disappear. The belief that Ethiopia still had a role to play in God's larger story. Even without a crowned king, many Ethiopians continued to see themselves as the spiritual heirs of the Ark, chosen by God for a purpose not yet fulfilled. This enduring belief has kept the heart of the story alive. Though politics may have shifted, the faith remained. The Church of Our Lady, Mary of Zion, still stands. The guardian monk still watches over the Ark. And among the people, the conviction that Ethiopia was and still is a sacred land continues to shape their spiritual outlook. For many, the fall of the monarchy wasn't the end of God's plan, but simply the beginning of a new chapter. Some believe that Ethiopia's divine mission isn't tied to crowns or palaces, but to the ongoing guardianship of the Ark and the values it represents: covenants, protection, and faithfulness. The Kebra Nagast even hints at a future where Ethiopia plays a central role in end times prophecy, when the Ark will once again be revealed to the world. That belief hasn't faded, it's only grown stronger in the face of adversity. The Solomonic line may no longer rule, but the story hasn't ended. In the hearts of many Ethiopians, it's still unfolding. And maybe that's the real lesson buried beneath all the history and mystery, that faith doesn't depend on thrones or titles. It lives in the stories we choose to carry forward, in the truths we hold sacred even when the world tells us to let them go. Ethiopia's claim to the Ark, whether fact or legend, is ultimately a story about identity, purpose, and the power of belief. It teaches us that sometimes spiritual authority isn't something inherited, it's something lived. Whether or not the Ark truly rests in Aksum, the deeper truth is this: a nation chose to see itself not as forgotten or forsaken, but as chosen. And in a world where faith often feels fragile, that kind of conviction is rare and powerful. So maybe the real takeaway for us today isn't about proving the Ark's location, but about asking ourselves what sacred purpose we're guarding in our own lives, and whether we're still brave enough to carry it forward.